Well, the tattoo museum, it wasn't anything I actually set out to do. I didn't want or feel the need to do a tattoo museum. It all happened totally by accident, really. It actually started with, I had a collection through years of tattooing myself, like being a tattooist and selling the equipment, which I always like to keep extra things of, which I knew were, limited runs, like Aaron Kane machines and old machines I'd come across and traded with. So it was just a little bit of just a very small time collector. And it wasn't until after a New Zealand earthquake, where a very, very well respected, probably the most well respected old school tattooer named Roger Ingerton, he retired, and the person he handed the shop over to, called Tom Downs, had a whole bunch of things off the walls of this old tattoo shop. And this tattoo shop hadn't changed since 1977. And so everything that was on the walls was taken down and rotated, pictures, photos, flash, equipment, all these things. And said, if something happens, we had a good relationship when we're friends, and he said, well, if something happens to the shop, if there's another earthquake or a fire or something happens to this tattoo shop, then we'd like you to look after these things for safekeeping, so that there's still something left behind if, worst case scenario, the shop is destroyed. And I said, okay. And it was a lot of stuff. I mean, stacks of photos and, kind of flash and equipment and certificates, all these types of things. Things that are one-off valuable, which is a collection of this person, of Roger's, part of his legacy. So I was like, okay, I put it into storage and looked after it and showed the odd person who came in, because I sell tattoo equipment too on the side. And then meeting other, and then I thought, well, I'll start interviewing these old, tattoo legends in New Zealand while they're still alive, and started interviewing them. And then somebody, I can't remember who, said to me, oh, you should do a tattoo. You've got all this stuff and all this information, and you care about, the history of tattooing in New Zealand and Australia, so why don't you do a tattoo museum? And I was like, not interested in that. I've got enough to do. I'm too busy. And as time progressed on and I accumulated more things, I was like, yeah, what I have here in my hands is very special, and it needs to be. And I started to feel like it needed to be shared with the tattooers, because I was starting to feel quite disillusioned the older I got, and the more I learned about tattooing years down the track, about the new generation of tattooers coming through, how little that they knew about these people who were, who set the standard and were set, paved the way for us being able to do what we do today. And so I was like, okay, and I needed to build a new office space and move my current business, Lucky Supply in New Zealand, to a bigger location, and change my whole format. So that was, at that time, I was like, well, I may as well do a tattoo museum at the same time, and that's how it all sort of started. And so built the tattoo museum, which was one of the most stressful things I think I've ever had to do. And because, you're not only dealing with just showing stuff in a gallery, you're representing someone's legacy, someone's life work, and these people are legends in New Zealand and Australia, and some of them had passed on since. I'd received some of these things from them, and some were still alive. And and because they all, I got to know them all, because, that generation of tattooers, you've got to understand, there weren't many tattooers back then, and tattooing was it was a real subculture, and it was behind, you know, tattooing was behind the curtain veil, so to speak, and it was a really sort of strange world, and not many people knew about it, and they didn't share stuff, so it wasn't what you knew, it was who you knew. And so once a few of the old legend, you know, these old time tattooers started trusting me that I had this accumulation of memorabilia and things, then the others started to communicate with each other and go, okay, you can trust Dre, and how about we share this stuff, because I wanted to represent everybody, you know, not just Roger or, you know, Merv or any one individual. I wanted to show the complete story of the progression of the who's who in tattooing, you know, the greats, so to speak. And then so you know, and you know, representing that and putting those things up, I had to be very careful, because, you know, and think about it, about how I was portraying it and how the museum was structured, because you don't want to misrepresent somebody or you know, put up informational photos of things that they weren't necessarily proud of. I mean, I have, you know, naked photos of some of these legend tattooers, and, you know, I've had to ask them, are you okay with me putting these up on the wall? And some of them are like, yeah, sure, fine. Others are like, yeah, please don't, you know. So
what are the most customers interested in? What do you think?
I think the customers are the most interested in the prices, because, you know, we have flash and you know, old flash sheets from the 1930s through World War II, you know, right up to the 90s, and, you know, early 90s is probably the cutoff, and they see the prices. In fact, some people who don't even realize it's a tattoo museum, the general public, they'll come in and they'll go, oh, that piece is $2.50. Oh, your prices are quite reasonable. And I'm like, no, that was the price in 1965, you know. So they're quite amazed at how cheap they were back then. But then once you start talking to people and explaining, you know, the value of $2.50 back in 1944 next to today, you know, it was quite even more expensive a tattoo back then than it was now, you know. So that's always interesting, but it gives people, I think, an idea and a gauge to see how tattooing's progressed, because some people will just see it as, oh, that's old stuff and it's horrible and the artwork's not very good. But, you know, it gives me the opportunity also to explain to people that back in the earlier days, a lot of tattooers weren't artists, not like now. They didn't go to art school, they didn't know formal education in art. A lot of them couldn't even draw. They would buy or trade their flash and their designs from other tattooers from over the world and write to each other, and they'd send a few designs and put on a sheet and color it in, and they'd just draw around the lines and tattoo them, and that was that. It shows people, you know, the progression of, well, these people tattooing back then wasn't so much of an art form, it was a trade. And a lot of tattooers then were also part-timers, because tattooing wasn't very popular. It was generally, you know, sailors and you know, in the Navy, and merchant sailors and military and people on the outcast of society, and gang members and people who, you know, were didn't want to conform to society's standards. It was a bit naughty to get tattooed. So, you know, there's all those connotations. So there wasn't that many. So a lot of tattooers were, you know, sign writers, and then their tattoo on the side. In fact, we have a suitcase from a tattooist in New Zealand from World War II. His name was Brendan Smith, and he was, we don't know what he did as a normal job, but he had a suitcase which was a travel case, and he'd open the lid, and every time a ship would come up to port, he'd open the lid and there'd be designs inside with the prices and the tattoo machine and little bottles of ink and everything, and he'd put his designs up, and the sailors would all get tattooed, and he'd tattoo them for a day and then put put it away, and then go back to his normal job, you know.
How far is the scene, the new tattoo scene is connected to this original roots in New Zealand, or is still any connection there? Or
Yeah, there's totally a connection. I mean, just purely for the fact of, you know, of the art form going from, you know, flash-based designs, which were bread and butter designs like a eagle and a skull with a dagger through death before dishonor and all of that sort of thing, to, you know, to starting to move to slowly fine art, and then because it changed from being flash on the walls and you'll have that tribal piece there or that other piece there, to more custom designs where they were starting to draw on the skin and specialize in more an artistic version of what was happening on the walls as that flash or those designs progressed, as new generations of tattooers came through. So the new generation of tattooers would get inspired by those old pieces, change them a little, and then do their own style, and then it slowly morphed into more customized tattooing progressively to, you know, I remember that with one of the first shops in Wellington that didn't have pictures or flash on the wall. They were like, we pride ourselves on having no flash. We're just 100% custom. We don't do the same thing twice.
Right.
And it's interesting because now it's almost like we've come full circle, and in New Zealand and Australia and America especially too, where everyone's putting the old designs back on the walls, but just rehashing them again so that they're just a little bit more refined and, you know, a bit more colourful, because now we have more colours than they had back then, you know. And our media's better, our tools are better. So, I mean, a lot of the things, like, you know, when you look at the museum, we've got rotaries in the museum from the 40s. You know, we've got, you know, tattoo machines, and, you know, the tattoo machines and the you know, the rotary machines and the coil machines haven't really changed that much. It's just like the flash and the designs and everything. It's just everything has been refined and perfected, you know, because as an artistic group of individuals, we're always trying to refine and perfect what we do. So, and now it's just, the caliber is just getting better and better and better. So the point of a tattoo museum isn't to show people how bad tattooing was. It was to show people the progression of how things were, how things, you know, and how they have changed through the decades to what we've all become now. Just as in the future they'll look back at what we're doing now, if there's a museum, and appreciate what we've done and go, oh, well, that was pretty rudimentary, but, you know, like we've changed. So
thanks a lot. Thank you.
No worries.